just watch what you say.
Hey folks, it's Jim Hanson. Today on the Friday Free Speech Show, we're going to shake things up a bit because we are joined today by Security Study Group's own Dr. Brad Patty, who is in town because he just gave a presentation at the Heritage Foundation on countering Russian propaganda. What we want to do today, though, Brad, is talk a little bit about one of your papers discussing the tension between free speech and human dignity. As in, does purely free speech that allows you to say whatever you want, even if it gives people bad feels, matter more than ensuring that people can have their dignity respected and don't have to have horrible things said about them in the public square? So I just ask you, how would you frame the tension between those two things?
Well, I think the tension is mostly an artifact of the way that certain philosophers have talked about this. And the way they talk about it is, if you suggest that somebody's going to be excluded from the community, driven out of the community, whatever, it's very difficult to square that with treating them with respect for their equality of dignity as a human being. And I think, that's an understandable argument until you start asking, well, wait a minute, where did this equality come from? Okay. Because it's not obvious that human beings have equal dignity. I mean, you need to argue for that. And frequently,
a lot of them show that they don't deserve it.
That argument seems like it gets skipped. You say, well, you got a meth head, you've got an astronaut. Do these people really have an equality of human dignity? And I mean, one road that conservatives could take is say, well, no, they don't. Right. But that's not what I would suggest. What I want to suggest is, in fact, there is an important quality of human dignity that our country, our republic, our history holds us to respect. But you have to be able to say exactly what that is. Okay. So there's two ways of doing it that make sense to me and that I think come out of the Enlightenment tradition. One way of doing it is the way that Thomas Jefferson does it in the Declaration of Independence. And he just says, as we all know, all men are created equal. That's self-evident, right? All men are created equal and they're endowed by their creator with equal rights.
But he's saying rights, not necessarily dignity.
Well, yeah, but you can frame the dignity in terms of that endowment.
The endowment by the Creator inherently gives him that. All right.
And what's nice about this, for one thing, is that it's if you believe in God and you believe that He did this, then it's done. We all have equal dignity because God says so. He made us that way.
Okay.
And that's fine for the Declaration of Independence. But then once you get the Constitution, you get the First Amendment. Mm-hmm. People aren't obligated to believe in God. There's, freedom of religion. You have any religion you want, no religion. You don't have to believe this particular proposition to be an American.
Okay.
So that probably isn't the way that you're going to want to defend it. The other way that makes sense out of the Enlightenment is from Immanuel Kant, the German philosopher. And his argument is, what makes humans dignified more than rocks or trees or stars or planets or things that he likes the sky, he talks about it a lot. But anything, just humans have this special dignity. What makes it okay to cut down a tree without its permission or not to hurt a person? What makes it okay to do these things? To break up a rock because you wanted it for gravel, whatever.
The problem with this argument is going to be that we have to exclude the resistance and those people right now who are out complaining that we're cutting down trees and affecting their arboreal dignity. But
we don't necessarily have to. I mean, but the point is,
we'll endow them just by gift. We'll give them this dignity, even though they've endowed it with the trees and the stars and the rocks.
Right. So anyway, the point is for Kant, what is it that makes it? What's different about you and all those things? What it is that you can think for yourself and make a decision about what you want to do.
Okay.
And the Milky Way galaxy can't. The comet, we can predict its path. We can predict Halley's Comet because of the laws of math and physics. We know where it's coming. It has no choice. Right. Can't do anything else. And for Kant, he thought, even with animals, they smell food, they get hungry, their instincts make them have to eat it. He thought they were sort of more like computers, more mechanically driven. We have some reasons to doubt that now. But the point is, you can definitely smell a hamburger, get hungry, want to eat it, but think to yourself, no, I'm not going to, because I'm on this diet, I want to look this particular way.
I'm supposed to eat kale today.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So you have autonomy, you have freedom. This, not political freedom, this is actual freedom.
Okay.
And that,
pure free will.
That makes you dignified in a way that these other things are not.
Okay.
Well, if that is in fact the root of our equality of dignity, and it is possibly, I mean potentially, the meth head made a choice, thought it for it, made a decision. The astronaut made different decisions. Maybe they worked out better, but the quality of the ability to make the decision, to think for yourself, to choose, that's what makes you dignified. Well, if that's the case, then, well, speech is just thinking out loud.
Okay.
And it's how we think together. So an attack on freedom of speech, on silencing somebody, preventing them from thinking out loud, preventing them being part of the process of us thinking together, choosing together, is an assault on the very basis of human dignity. That equality of human dignity is rooted on this very quality. And you simply can't justify an assault on human dignity as huge as this, attacking the very root of it, in order to say, well, but there's this lesser way in which human dignity is damaged by allowing the speech. It just doesn't make sense to attack the fundamental quality in order to protect some lesser affront.
And the lesser quality being feelings getting hurt, being, but they like to take it to the next level and say that some speech by its nature is not just painful to a person, but it creates danger, it creates an unsafe space, it creates the potential for violence, even if it's not inciting violence. It creates an environment that is fundamentally, I believe they argue, damaging to human dignity.
Yes, and those are problem sets that there are ways of addressing. But if the goal is protecting this equality of human dignity, violating it in its most basic manner isn't going to get you there. You can't say, well, we hold everybody to have equal dignity except for you. You must shut up.
Right.
You don't think the
like
right
what you
things.
say.
So, the whole reason you're dignified is because you can think for yourself and make a choice. But your thoughts aren't acceptable, so you better shut up about them, and you better not act on them, even to speak them out loud.
Okay, so let's go to the most basic remedy for the ills that the speech police and thought police would apply to ensure that dignity is, saved. And in this case, the dignity being the right to actually speak, regardless of how someone else, takes it. And the most simple answer to it is the one that the Supreme Court applied and has spoken about, that the remedy for speech you don't like is more speech.
That's right.
And consequently, if you don't like what someone's saying, instead of telling them to shut up, speak yourself.
Yeah, positive demonstrations of support for a marginalized community are more powerful, I think, than just trying to silence the people you believe are marginalizing them. Because for one thing, it shows everyone that they're not going to be excluded. Here's a bunch of people who support you and they're willing to stand up for you. That's much more powerful. They may have wondered, they may have thought in the back of their mind, maybe I really am not welcome here. Maybe I'm a foreigner, maybe I'm an alien, maybe whatever. But when they see that people stand up for them and say, no, we support you, we welcome you, we will defend you, then you have a positive demonstration. It's much better.
And you made an example of that regarding reactions to some, unwelcoming speech, where the reactions were almost overwhelmingly to support this marginalized community, as opposed to join with the haters who were trying to push it down, and actually showed that community demonstrably that the number of people who support them vastly outweighed the number of people who want to join the haters. And I believe the point you made was that wouldn't have been known to that community absent everybody having the right to speak, including the haters.
True. That's right. That's right. It's only because people said the hateful things that it provoked this reaction. And absent that reaction, they may have wondered just how broad a base of support they had, whether or not they really were going to be excluded, in danger of being excluded. And of course, it also allows you to see who the haters are if you let them talk.
And they marginalize themselves.
Yeah,
that's the
right.
thing. Okay, they may, the case gets made that if you allow hateful speech, it will generate, it's a recruiting tool for the haters. And in almost every case, it becomes almost the opposite. In every time they give the Nazis a permit to speak or do anything, the counter demonstration is massive. It dwarfs by orders of magnitude the morons who want to put out their white supremacist idiotic views. So absent that ability for them to put it out, you lose them self-identifying as idiots, and you lose the ability to show support for the community. But you made another point that I think is important too, is if you outlaw the speech itself, you drive it underground. It's not going away.
That's right.
All right, idiots who believe that, the people who believe these heinous and hateful things, are not going to stop that. What they're going to do is, if they are not allowed to speak it publicly, be mocked, get praise from a couple clapping toothless idiots, and then be, disdained by the rest of society, they will form secret societies, in which case they will believe potentially that they have more support than they do and less disdain.
Right. I think that's the story of the Charlottesville issue. We've had two of them now. And the first time, I think the internet allowed them to form this kind of like underground community. They talk to each other, and they got this sense that maybe there's a lot more of us, because we found 500 of us around the country willing to come together. And it turned out, which is a good thing about America, that there aren't more than 500 of you maybe, and you're certainly going to encounter a hostile reaction. And so this year, I saw a sign walking around D.C. last night that said that, there were only 24 of them showed up. I don't know if that's right, but it sounds right.
Yeah, that's what they said.
And I think that that's a very positive quality. Now, of course, that's a feature of America, that we have this kind of pluralistic, accepting society. But if it weren't a feature of your country, if in fact it were the case that really it was a danger, that soon there was going to be a mob of people excluding you and driving you out, killing you, taking your stuff, you might want to know that. And so even in that extreme case, in which you're in a society that it really is about to exclude a marginalized population, I think freedom of speech is still the way to go, because you need to send a warning that those people who
buy
are
guns,
in danger,
buy ammo, sharpen your knives.
Yeah, it might be time to sell your property. You might want to get on a plane, or you might want to form an organization to defend yourselves. I mean, those are viable options.
Okay, so let's posit that the idea that speech, even hateful speech, is a net good, because it allows you to identify the ideas that could cause problems, and it allows both those who say them to see where their level of support is, and society to see just how widespread that problem is and react to it.
Right.
And level the playing field in a way that pushes the people with the hateful ideas into the corner where they belong. And they're there. They're not, they're not hiding, they're not in a corner, they're not doing anything like that. So let's take now the constitutional support for free speech, the government's role, and what society should be doing right now in an environment where the left is increasingly trying to do the exact opposite. All right, they are putting forth the idea that no, not any kind of speech, but all kinds of speech that cause another person discomfort even, let alone actual pain, but discomfort, make them uncomfortable, microaggressions, things that are not even, don't even rise to the level of an actual legitimate problem, need to be stopped, and people have some innate right to not be offended. All right, now the First Amendment doesn't apply unless we're going to decide that the government is going to do that, and I don't believe they get a vote on that. So now we're back to who in society, and how do we change that tide that I think is moving in the wrong direction?
Well, one of the reasons we're talking about this today is that I wanted to advance that very philosophical argument I started with about the fact that freedom of speech is fundamental to human dignity. And that's something I think we really need to push on. When we encounter groups that really are organized around trying to suppress speech, and especially when they defend themselves as they tend to do in terms of human dignity, we should confront them on that and tell them, you're going to have to show us how you ground human dignity differently. Where is this equality of human dignity? How do you ground it? Let's make them engage that argument, because I think they skip that step.
Or they, well, I think you're right. I think they skip it and move directly to all humans have the right to not be offended. Or all humans I agree with, I think is even closer to the actual thing. Because the people I disagree with, we want to suffer.
Typically, we're offending them right now.
Right.
We're offending them by telling you are such an awful person that you can't be allowed to talk. And we'll probably throw in some names, and so Yeah, after I finish calling you names, we'll agree that you have a right not to be offended, maybe, somehow.
Okay, so we've got a situation where there's a chunk of society, and it's growing in some areas, and so is the response to it, which we are a part of, that says no, there is no right to not be offended. There is a right to speak pretty much anything short of libel, slander, or incitements to violence.
Oh, you can speak libel and slander. You're just going to court. Right?
Consequences.
That's right.
Okay, which is fine.
The only speech we should really be trying to stop is immediate threats. Let's go
the Brandenburg,
kill that
Ohio.
guy right there. Right. Let's all of us together go stomp that guy in the ground. That I can understand the government saying, yeah, that's actionable. You shouldn't say that. But anything short of that, it's a net good. We should just take the good with the bad. That's how you do in a free society. But this is a net good.
So, but we have, and one of the things we're fighting right now is social media. The social media companies now control such a vast swath of our information landscape. And they've decided that, and it's partly the usual suspects on the left who are complaining and saying there are people saying mean things on here, and not just, I don't want to hear it. Because they already have that. The social media companies gave them a mute button, a block button, a way to stop listening to things that offend them.
Right.
But that's not good enough. All right. They want to stop people from saying things they don't like, they disagree with, and that could hurt any particular group of people. Is there any need for the social media companies to, in that essentially digital public town square that they operate, to cater to that?
So the problem with the social media companies, as you put it out, is that they're private actors. They're not bound by the First Amendment. They can, in a sense, do what they want. There are some limits on that have been established in the law in the past, such as in mining towns, company towns. The public square is owned by the company. Can we also say you can't criticize the company here in town that we own, and all the land around the town, which we also own? There have been limits set on that in the past. But the basic idea is that, can we say that there's an analogy here to these, that their networks are so powerful, so widespread, that they're in a similar position where they've kind of come to privately own the public space. And it may very well be, given the way that networks work, we talked about this at the talk at Heritage this morning, networks have a value that is an exponent of the number of nodes that they connect. So you're a node, I'm a node, you connect as many people as you do. Starting a new network then is not just a little bit less powerful, but it's so much less powerful that it's just a waste of time. And you can't really have the public space discussion. If that's the case, then there's a very good argument. If this is in fact our public square where we're having a political discussion, maybe we do want the First Amendment to apply to it. And if that's the case, well, there's eminent domain. The government can simply purchase it. Twitter, I don't know what Twitter is worth.
$50.
I know their cost must be very high, and their revenue is what it is.
Insufficient to defray those.
As long as you pay fair market value, whatever that is, the government can simply buy it, and then the First Amendment does apply. And then we can all just have the political discussions that America's all about.
All right. I would prefer not to. I'm not a huge fan of eminent domain, although it does have its places. So we're in the position where we have to pressure, shame, or coerce these social media companies into doing what's the right thing, which is to essentially apply a First Amendment-like standard to that public space that they're operating.
Well, they certainly have the choice to do that, and especially if they would prefer to avoid eminent domain, it's one option. And we have lesser options. We talked a little bit this morning about the fairness doctrine, which used to apply to broadcast media. There's a similar kind of argument. The broadcast media, it applied to them because they controlled all the bandwidth. You could only have a few channels in those days, so we needed to make sure that perspectives had a chance to be represented on those few channels. And there's something like that going on with the domination of the nodes that they have with their networks. Right. So, there are lesser, if you don't like my suggestion, there are lesser ways of going about it.
There's also, the Communications Decency Act, they're currently exempt from defamation suits because they're considered internet service providers, distributors of content, not creators or publishers or editors of content. And I think there's a fair argument to be made that once they started deciding that certain types of content by editorial value are more important than others, that they may have crossed that line. So that's another way to coerce them. And again, I don't want to have to do that. I don't want the government to do anything. They suck at everything they do.
Fair point.
So given a choice between the government doing and the social media companies doing the right things, I think this is a perfect, and President Trump's been doing it. He's been using the bully pulpit.
Yeah,
The way it's designed. I am the president. I have a lot of authority. Be a shame if that nice Silicon Valley company you have out there got a bit of government regulation, investigation, or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, they have the choice. They can just decide to do it, and if that's what they want to do. And if not, there are various tools. And as you say, the people on the right are very suspicious of the government. There was pushback this morning when I mentioned the fairness doctrine. The very next guy said, "Oh, yeah, no, we're not going to do that. We don't like that idea." And you don't like eminent domain. Okay, there are a lot of options. There are a lot of options. I tend to think that eminent domain might be the way to go, but we'll just put it before Congress, our representatives. We'll have the folks from the social media company part of the conversation, and we'll see if they can come up with a way to satisfy us. And if not, there are other options.
Well, let's hope we don't get there, because we're not far. At this point, the legitimate viewpoint discrimination going on by the social media companies is intolerable. So we're asking you, Google, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, why don't you guys stop talking about having content neutral platforms and look at the outcome? All right, if you say you're not doing it on purpose, great. But if it's happening, then your good intentions no longer matter. And to be honest, I'm not sure their intentions were all that good to start with. I think they might consider this a feature and not a bug of their systems, and that's not good enough. So we're asking you guys, square yourselves away, or you may face the consequences that none of us really want. Now we're going to introduce our interlocutor. James Middlebrook from America Matters has been listening to this conversation and has some questions for both Brad and myself. James?
So the first question I have is going to Brad, and it revolves around your last point about eminent domain. So you think that eminent domain should be implied on the case of Twitter or Facebook because they have created such a strong platform that a new platform being created could never become as powerful as they are. So the government should step in and purchase the company. I find that to be a slippery slope, and I'm wary of it. A company has done so well in the free market, people are still going to it, that the government has to seize. Would you care to comment on that?
Certainly. First of all, it's not necessarily impossible to overwhelm something like Twitter. But if it is in fact the case that its node structure is large enough that competitors would be ineffective for a long time, and it is effectively the public space for discussion, then, of course we want our public space for discussion to be governed by First Amendment norms. That makes sense to me. And I don't see that, there's no slippery slope there for anything that isn't effectively the public space. But slippery slope arguments are better arguments than I think a lot of people realize. In philosophy departments, we often teach students to avoid them because it's an informal fallacy to say, well, this is a slippery slope, because there's always something that could stop you at every point down the line. However, I'm old enough now that I've watched a lot of slippery slope arguments, and we were right all the way down the slope. And 20 years later, that's exactly what they said would happen. So it's really good to inquire about limiting principles and logic like you're doing, and I very much approve of it. But I don't think there's really much of an issue here, because it only would possibly apply in a case in which we've reached a point at which the public space is effectively owned privately. Other than that, it's not going to come up.
Me, I just want to scare the crap out of the social media companies and get them to do what's right instead of having the government buy them.
Okay, so next is referring to how essentially counter-protesters can shut down demonstrators that you feel are demonstrating on bad values. Charlottesville in DC, when Charlottesville came up here. What is the difference there with the virtue of the counter-protesters there and overshadowing what the demonstrators were saying, and say going to a university where a conservative speaker is talking and counter protesters go and shut down that speech, and that's not virtuous.
Well,
That's the good old heckler's veto.
the issue is that you're getting to shut down rather than you're conflating shut down and overshadow. It's nice to see that there's a lot more people who favor tolerance and good-heartedness towards others versus Nazism, right? That's good. But we shouldn't allow the shutting down even of the Nazi speech. That's something we have to arrange for that. We have to make provision because people don't like it. So we have to send police out to protect them so that they can do their thing. Just like in our favorite movie, The Blues Brothers, they drive through it and run the Nazis. That's what will happen.
Illinois Nazis, you shouldn't run them off the bridge even as funny
unfortunately.
as that was.
They're a great movie, but in reality, we're not trying to shut down even that kind of hateful speech. But it's good for people to come out and engage in positive acts of counter speech that show that they don't approve of it. And I think that if it encourages an argument, good.
And here's the thing, the folks doing that on campus, on the left, are beyond rude. They've appointed themselves thought police. They've appointed themselves the speech police. And they've decided that they will determine what speech is permissible. So it's not a question. Brad's theory posits that the idea of showing your displeasure with destructive speech helps the marginalized community, helps those who are being affected by that speech, which is potentially marginalizing them, by showing them they're actually not marginalized. But when what you do is go ahead and not even allow the speech to happen because you have decided that speech is unworthy, you skip that step.
Right.
You completely have skipped that step, and you've become a mob. You've exercised a heckler's veto, and you've made all of us fundamentally less free.
Kind of piggybacking on that, Jim, what if when these demonstrators that are demonstrating things that are objectively terrible, there aren't enough people to object to that? There aren't enough counter-protesters to show that there is unsupporting people out there. So the majority hold a terrible feeling and want to express it, and there's not enough people to show that's wrong. I guess my
mob rule.
Yeah.
So essentially, okay, what happens when you've got a mob and there's not a counter mob to show that society is on the side of the oppressed, or in this case, the mob.
Not the oppressed, because in this case, they literally are the oppressed.
Yeah,
they're about to be, right?
There's no scare quotes needed.
We don't need the scare
They
quotes,
are
right.
in danger of being oppressed, and in that case, you've got law enforcement. You've got actual societal safety measures that will stop dangerous things like that from happening. If people are doing something that is demonstrably dangerous, not just hurting someone's feelings, because that's where the thought police, self-appointed, want to say, no, if you're hurting feelings, you can't do that, and say it. Yeah, you can, and you should be able to. But if a mob is in a situation where they're actually calling for, and again, we go back almost to the incitement of violence, the Brandenburg versus Ohio ruling, that says, if you're saying, we hate Jews, we hate gays, we hate white males, all right, good. Okay, say that. Most people will disagree with you and say that's a stupid thing to say. When you say, white males are bad, we should go string some up, then you're in a situation where you can call the police. Because that's incitement to violence, and you've got a situation where the government can actually shut that down. So if it happens one time, you can either dial 911 if it's imminent violence, or you can go to the internet, go to social media, and tell everybody. And then you can build a secondary counter mob.
I want to just piggyback on that for a second, because we actually discussed the limit case to that, which is that in a country besides ours, you might get to a case where none of those options exist, and those people are in danger of being oppressed. The mob is coming for them, and no one's going to stop them. Even in that case, I have held that free speech is still better because it serves as a warning to the community that they're in danger, and they need to take positive steps to protect themselves. It's not pretty in those cases. That's the hard case. But even there, I think freedom of speech is the way to go.
So on another question of freedom of speech and freedom of expression, what if the freedom of speech isn't necessarily, the speech isn't inciting violence, but inciting discrimination? So someone is being oppressed without being physically assaulted. You can't attend this service. You can't eat here. That's speech. That is advancing those values. And that's by speaking, that's how values, that's how ideas are spread, picked up. And now, in this situation, a majority now holds a discriminatory value based on allowing this thought to disseminate.
Tough.
Okay.
You know, unfortunately, that's where you have to say tough. Now, if it gets to the point where this, because we've got laws against discrimination in public spaces, in restaurants and things like that,
Wow.
you can't simply, based on certain classes. Okay, so if the point you're making is that could advance to the point where the mob now stops people from being able to shop at a mall. You know, you say, okay, this mall is for Hispanics only. You know, this is a Hispanic-only mall, and only they can shop here. And then you've got scary Hispanic dudes at the front of it stopping people from coming in. At that point, you can take action because that's, you know, an actual form of discrimination. But calling for it is still, to Brad's previous point, you want them to call for it so you know they believe that, and then you can organize against it. Because if you get to the point where the mob rules and they actually start implementing things like that, if the current laws don't stop that, and mostly they do, we can pass new laws. You know, and that would be the point. You let them speak. If they get a critical mass, then we can say, okay, they're reaching a critical mass of being able to literally stop people from doing things in public that we think they should be free to do. We need to add that to the protected classes and the protected things that we don't allow discrimination on the basis of. And we can expand the civil rights laws.
Yeah, for the most part, that doesn't come apart from your previous hypothesis. For example, Sarah Sanders, we all know the story about the red hen. Okay, they discriminated against her, and that's tough for her, and I know she didn't enjoy it, and she made that very clear when she talked to the press about it. But, you know, it's not illegal, and it's not clear that it ought to be illegal. It's, however, not nice, and it's perfectly fair for people to object to it, and for people not to go to the Red Hen or wherever, you know, in a case like this. I don't want to, I'm trying to universalize off this example. But this is not a protected class. Discrimination's okay. You're allowed to say that you don't want to discriminate, you're allowed to discriminate. And that's, you know, we have social, not even legal sometimes, social methods for combating that.
So, viewpoint discrimination. Let's go there. So, with Sarah Sanders, if Red Hen expanded not just to Trump administration officials, but we will not serve any conservatives in this restaurant, and they stay in business through the free market of enough people around them still going to the restaurant, is that a point where there should be
There are a lot of
government stepping
restaurants that
into-
don't serve conservatives, right? I mean, there are a lot of restaurants that don't serve liberals. Biker bars do not. I mean, not because they have a policy against it, but, you know, just the market's big enough in cases like this. We're only talking about cases where the public square itself is threatened. And it's not going to be because your restaurant isn't necessarily welcoming to everyone who has every point of view.
And I would much rather do that via the market rather than adding another protected class.
Okay.
I think at this point, the left would love to multiply protected classes because identity politics is what they do. The more preferred victim groups you have, the more clients you have for government control and government taking care of you. And I have zero interest in expanding that. I would prefer if we got to the point where we didn't need those protections at all because society self-regulated. We didn't for long enough that we definitely needed them. All right, but I definitely don't want to expand them.
So can I ask you a question then, just to clarify a point? So the difference between Twitter needing to be regulated or if they don't respond to the public pressure, and the restaurant is that Twitter is now so powerful that it's become the public square.
Yeah, that's right. It's ownership of the public square, which is an essentially political space.
Okay.
That is how we hash out our politics in representative democracy. If we can't do it, I mean, that's what the First Amendment is for, is to protect political speech above all. And so if we're talking about the public square for political speech no longer being free, we need to address that. We need to address that and restore First Amendment norms, one way or the other.
But there's plenty of restaurants. You
Yeah,
know, I mean,
plenty of restaurants.
if I don't get served at the artisanal arugula bar, I can go across the street to the biker bar with Brad, and they're definitely going to serve me a cheeseburger.
They are.
And I'm going to be happier in the long run with that. Hey, I'd like to thank James Middlebrook for joining us and asking some pertinent and insightful questions. Dr. Brad Patty from Security Studies Group joining us here and sharing with us his first principles views of free speech. That's going to wrap up Free Speech Friday, and I can tell you right now, we ain't going to shut up.
Freedom of speech. Yeah, just watch what you